and welcome to episode 34 of MindMineTV. This is Tatiana and Evin, and we are excited to have you with us today.
You sound super excited. Let's get pumped. Let's get that energy going. Come on.
I am just not close enough to the microphone. Hello. That's what it is.
People are putting us to their eardrums. We've got to wake them up a little bit. We got a lot of good stuff going on. I mean, and a lot of good conversations to have today about some really awesome topics that you came across this week.
Yes, it is a law-themed episode, if I do say so myself.
Like Law and Order. I love that show.
There's a lot of those types of shows, like CSI, Law and Order.
And there's like multiple versions of Law and Order at that. Like
yes.
Multitude.
Which I watched the one where was it Vince Vaughn? No, not Vince Vaughn. Oh my goodness. What is that? It's that guy that's really good in Law and Order, whose name I have completely forgotten right now. I'm so sorry. But I watched that one a lot with his lady partner.
Ooh, his lady partner. That sounds personal. Ooh, that's like Law and Order After Dark or something.
Oh, well, I think they have one of those too.
I'm sure there's always some sort of rendition, right?
Yeah.
Some sort of something you will find on the interwebs. It never fails.
And hello, everybody who is watching us on Twitch. How is it going? If you are listening to us on Podbean or iTunes or watching us on YouTube, definitely come join us every Thursday, 4 p.m. PDT, and every Saturday at 2 p.m. PDT. Come join us on Twitch, twitch.tv/MindMineTV. We'd love to have the conversation with you. And yes, we will get pumped. Woo! We have my caffeine. Hold on.
Tatiana is just really excited about using her like radio jazz voice. So that's what she was trying to do in the beginning there. It's like, hi, welcome to Smooth Jazz with MindMineTV. How y'all doing today?
That is an interesting jazz voice you've got going on right now. I'm not really sure.
That's my jazz voice trying to be your jazz voice. That's all.
My jazz voice is no, I can't do it. It's the pressure. It's the pressure here. Now having to have the jazz voice, as it were. But yes, we have excuse me. We have got some interesting topics. Very, very timely, very in the now topics. And reading about them, you know, I obviously had to then get lost in the Wikipedia hole of knowledge. Wherein I learned even more. So we always encourage our listeners to, you know, if you've talked about something here, if you've heard something here that really piques your interest, feel free to do a little bit more digging yourself. We love to have additional commentary both in our Discords and our Twitter, on our Twitch about some of these topics, because they're not just, yeah, we talked about it for an hour, we're good to go. All right, that's it. Done. Right? These are ongoing conversations that we'd love to have with you guys. So,
yeah, well, and these topics have an ongoing impact on our lives, which is why we pick these topics. We don't just look at something and go, oh, well, someone had a really shitty Monday, let's talk about it. And then hopefully on Tuesday, everything will be fine. Like, these are things that have a lot of weight to them, and not only have just initiated or just started, but these are things that maybe have been going on for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And finally, there's some attention coming to them because we're now feeling the impact. And so now we have to figure out, well, what to do next. And that takes more time and more work. And I know most people go, oh, time and work. You know, I got to play my Angry Birds app, or I got to, whatever, go get coffee at Starbucks. I ain't got time for this shit. But you know what? It all impacts our lives. So it's important to at least, as Tatiana said, take this information and do some digging of your own. Don't take our research at face value. You know, really try to see what else you can come across as well.
Indeed. And hello, Rainbow Smashed, Vargala's Vet, Dark Akito Akuma, Mario Man, and Touch Me Nancy. Welcome. Get me pumped. This is an NPR. Get me pumped. Woo! Are you ready to party?
Hog champ. Holy shit. So many.
So
Hey,
many.
So many.
And of course, people who are listening to this on Podbean or iTunes or Google Play, they're going, what the hell is PogChamp?
Oh.
So, of course, we have emotes on Twitch, and it's just basically this guy with his mouth open in surprise. So, again, if you want to get this lingo and understand what the hell we're talking about, join us live. Again, every Thursday and Saturday. We'd love to have you here and really get in the conversation and chat with us and chat with all the people in our chat as well, and share your thoughts, your philosophies and beliefs on these different subjects. Because again, we tend to have a really rich conversation when you bring something to the table as well. So we'd love to have you involved with these conversations too.
All right, so first up, China. We all know China. We love it. It's in Marco Polo. It's great.
Well, and we get most of our goods, to at least to here in the U.S., from China, for example.
I mean,
look at the iPhone, for example. They're a company out of California, but everything is manufactured, for the most part, in China. So China really has a big impact, of course, on our economy. So there's a lot of weight behind what happens in China and how it impacts us.
That is true. That is true. So in 1979, China, as you may or may not know, China instituted the one-child policy. That's right. It meant that families could only have one child. And that was due to the response because between the 1940s to the 1970s, China's population literally doubled. So, of course, the government naturally was like, you guys, we got to do something about this. Oh, I know, said someone really smart, quote unquote. Let's just make it so that we can't have, women can't have too many kids. Families are limited to only one child. What could possibly go wrong? And everyone else high-fived him and off they went. Well,
he was probably the same engineer of the Death Star too. Just throwing that out there.
Well, as it turns out, a lot of things happened because of that one decision in 1979. Now, as a result of it, of course, there in the 1960s in China, there were about an average of about 6 babies born per woman, and that shrunk to about 1.57.
Jeez.
So one and a half babies, like a half a baby was born. I don't know. It's very weird. Averages.
And they connected
strange,
it with another half baby, and then they put that whole baby into the army.
So 3 babies per 2 women is the way I think of it. If there's 2 sisters and that whole family, they're gonna have about 2 babies total. That's how I'm viewing that. But it shrunk to about 1.57 average per woman now. Now that's a huge drop. And just to give you some context and comparison, you need about 2 babies born per woman to actually maintain a growing population, or a sustainable population, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So 1.57 is just below that, right? Plus, it's a huge difference. 6 babies to less than 2. Holy crap, right? And we'll go into a little bit about how this also impacted further, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the history of China. At the end of 2015, the government again was like, okay, hold on, listen. About 4 decades ago, we made a little mistake. Okay, so we're gonna own up to it, and we're gonna institute this 2-child policy instead, huh? Now you can have 2 kids, and we're hoping to get up the birth rate, basically. And why, you ask? Why was it a mistake? Why are they doing that now? Well, less people have been getting married. More people have been getting divorced. And, of course, financially, and I think this is true, I feel like, in every country, but financially, more and more people are feeling like they can't have a lot of kids. Even if one, right? And that, of course, there's also have been a preference for male heirs. And so there have been some selective abortions. And so all of that had created a rather terrible gender imbalance in the country as well. In rural China, apparently, it's still possible to see slogans painted on walls to like remind everybody that, hey, quote, it's illegal to drown your daughters. Okay? Like, chill it down.
Wow, really?
Which is crazy to think about.
Like, that had to be a conversation right there. Like, hey, by the way, do you mind not doing that? There's a difference between having a baptism and a drowning. Like, is that really... wow. That's pretty crazy. But then again, you know, the government has implemented such strict regulations on the people that they feel desperate, which in that respect does make sense. Because, and especially it's easy for us to go, whoa, that's freaking nuts, because we're not in that situation. But again, when you're dealing with the Chinese government, you worry. You stress about making sure you don't break the law, otherwise they don't see you again.
Right. And of course there are, I think about nearly 13 million undocumented Chinese people right now who were born during these past 4 decades where they weren't supposed to be born. And they're undocumented. So of course they've had no access to all of your, traditional resources like education, basic financial survival. So that in of itself was an issue that came out of it as well. But still, today, China actually has 34 million more men than women. And of course, we are talking about sort of that heterosexual pairing in terms of having the kids, quote unquote. However, if you're looking at what all of that can impact, for example, you've got some of the more obvious things like widespread and crushing loneliness for some people. But also, there's actually correlation with having this gender imbalance. There's correlation with spikes in violent crime, trafficking, prostitution. There's actually love schools in China that have sprung up to teach, the bachelors how to bag a bride, as it were.
Yikes.
And sorry about that. And there's actually an increasing number of Chinese men that have been buying brides from other countries around China. And there's like fake, girlfriends, boyfriends who accompany individuals on dates or family outings to show like, no, it's cool. Like, I got somebody, right? So there's a lot of interesting, potentially one might say negative impacts from this. Now, on the positive side, because of this gender imbalance, there's actually more female students than male students at Chinese universities. Because while this one-child policy was in effect, girls who weren't illegally drowned got equal access to resources. And right now, currently, women are actually responsible for 41% of the Chinese GDP, which is the highest proportion in the world. That's right. It's higher than the US, y'all. I know we think we're progressive and innovative and all that. But out of the 123 self-made female billionaires, 93 of them are Chinese.
Wow.
That's a huge percentage.
And that's a number definitely in the U.S. that we don't hear about. And that's massive because that's also a number we don't hear about in our own culture. Like, especially in the U.S., you don't hear that because we have the issues of the glass ceiling and everything, and women trying to get into leadership roles. And then once they're in those leadership roles, to try to take on all the stereotypes of being like, oh, she's a heinous bitch, or, other crazy crap, right?
Oh, of course. And that still happens in China as well. There's still the discrimination because even though these women have access to more resources and are able to, break quote unquote some of these ceilings, they're still supposed to be married by 25 and with like a kid on the way. But just one, maybe two. So the discrimination is still there. Now, what's interesting in terms of live streaming, because of this gender imbalance, there's an interesting live streaming phenomenon that's happening in China. And basically, you know, quote, pretty young women, unquote, can actually earn six-figure salaries by sharing their, you know, their humdrum lives to men who watch. And that's incredible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we already know the power of live streaming here in the U.S. You know, we see major companies trying to get into the live streaming space. And, you know, they see it because it's, of course, money, right? But for these women, though, they see it as money, too. And for men, they see it as a way of connecting because they're just, as you're putting it, not enough women to go around for all the men. And that says a lot because we in America kind of joke around because we see a lot of these streams out there where the woman's just like eating or brushing her hair or not really doing much of anything, right? And we see a lot of clips on Twitch, I do at least, which is, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, what's the popularity here? Like, what is actually going on? And that explains a lot about those.
Indeed. And I have watched those streams where they're literally brushing their hair, and I'm like in awe of why thousands of people are watching. Yeah, and you know, obviously the other thing to consider besides the gender imbalance is that by 2050 over 330 million Chinese people will be over the age of 65. So now we're looking at, you know, China being what the world's current number 2 economy right now. By 2050, there will be a heck of a lot of less people in the workforce, potentially, assuming that over the age of 65 they will just up and stop working. But they're, of course, as they're going to age, the elderly will face additional physical ailments that they will have to take care of, right? And so is the country going to be equipped to deal with that? Unclear. I mean, 2050, that's basically only, 30 years away?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a lot of time to kind of create everything that you might need, that you might think you might need to support a very large aging population. So the government is trying to be like, no, come on, like birth out some people so that, you know, in 30 years they'll be productive working members of our society. But it is hard to fix, you know, 4 decades worth of birth suppression with a surge in just baby making right now, just in a few years, you know.
Well, and you know what's amazing to me, by the way, about this topic is that the absolute opposite, from what I understand, is happening in places like India, where there's this huge boom of younger individuals, young professionals coming into the workforce and taking on so many different elements, including things like customer care and tech and everything else. And there's this huge boom of this youth and actually a smaller portion now of the elderly in a way. Whereas now we're seeing the opposite in China. It's just fascinating that all because of certain regulations or certain elements that have impacted the economy can have such vast differences to two different cultures. It absolutely is amazing. And then also, too, I know Japan is going through, if I remember right, also high levels of elderly with not as many of the youth. And a lot of them, of the youth, seem to be leaving Japan or be going into the city away from like villages and farmlands. So now you have a lot of elderly on the outskirts, not having the younger people to take over that land and to do something with it, as well as assist those elderly individuals. So we're seeing a lot of these trends all over, whether on one spectrum or the other. And it's absolutely fascinating to see the impact, again, because of these very specific regulations. And then, you know, now people are going, oh, shit, what do we do now?
Some interesting commentary in chat that I want to also get to. It looks like a majority of people in chat have said, you know, they have no children, potentially aren't necessarily planning on any children in the very near future. But then again, I don't think we have anybody in chat who is in China currently, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. Keep those little slobber demons away, please. Right. And the there's a few articles out there too on this subject matter where the author has noted, yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could just birth a 20-year-old right now? Just have it ready to go, right? You don't have to deal with any of the other unpleasantries.
We have the technology. We shall make them older, faster, smarter.
Touch Me Nancy says that he will go to China and make it his life's work to repopulate it. That is very kind of you.
Well, way to be giving. Of course, you have to compete with all the other men there also looking. So good luck with that, Drew.
Well, it sounds like a few gentlemen from China are actually looking and purchasing brides from other countries. So that'll actually be interesting. Well, that has also created some interesting circumstances, of course, of trafficking and other human rights issues. There's also a few instances where certain women were, I think they used the word groomed on social media and then taken from their homes. So the desperation is definitely there in some ways. But it'd also be interesting to see sort of this influx of, foreign individuals into the country as well. And individuals, particularly women. So I could go there and just do a hairbrushing stream. So I'll see you later. I'm going to buy a ticket to China. I will send the money back home.
And for those that are listening via podcast, it can just be hairbrushing ASMR.
Right.
Which is also a thing, by the way, if you're not familiar with that. And if you don't know what ASMR is, look it up. You'll find plenty of examples online here on Twitch, as well as on YouTube and many other video platforms.
Indeed. And it's interesting. The other interesting commentary on this subject is that although abolishing... So in 2015, they introduced the two-child policy. But since then, they've actually been thinking about doing away with that as well. And sort of maybe not even putting any sort of number cap on it. Just have all the kids you want. Which, on the one hand, it's a net positive for freedom of choice, right? And not having the government tell you what you can and cannot do with your own body. On the other hand, it's actually curtailing a lot of the gender equality it helped spawn. Because women who don't want more children, or any children, who are already in positions of authority, of power, of financial freedom, they're feeling pressured by their husbands or their parents, certainly the government and society as a whole, to have kids, right? And so we're actually looking at this bizarre phenomenon where 41% of the workers in China are female, but also can you stay home and have some kids too while you're at it?
No pressure.
Yeah, like
Easy.
Do all of it, please. And, maybe also settle down and marry somebody, for God's sakes. What are you doing with your life? And so, the government, of course, is sending mixed signals. And you're right, exactly. Putting so much pressure on one gender to sort of solve all their issues, right? Please work for us and continue producing at the output that you've been producing. But also, take some time off. Have some kids, deal with that, even though you may have not been used to this at all, and now do it at later stages in your life. Change your whole thing, but also keep producing at the same output, but also take some time and then have some. It's like, what do you want me to do, man?
You know what, I'm curious too, and it's something that the article doesn't really touch on at all, but I would be curious on also the impact of the amount, because again, they said like 90% of women are college educated or getting college education. So, being as we were from Boston and now we're in LA, So in the state of California, we've seen the East Coast, we've seen the West Coast when it comes to education. And we do know that there are a lot of students that come from China to get an education here in the U.S., whether they go to Boston College, Boston University, whether they go to UCLA or what have you. There is a lot of people coming from China over to the U.S., and I know that many of them tend to graduate and do try to get a work visa to stay in the U.S. So I'm curious on how much of the education factor, too, of them getting an education internationally also impacts the situation happening in China. Because if they're getting, throngs of women from China over to the U.S. and staying in the U.S. for years now during the time where they're kind of expected in China to marry up, have children, and get that whole process going. Does that have an impact? And again, I'm not saying, then they should stay over in China and get an education there. But it's just an interesting factor to see how much of an impact that actually has on that whole situation as well.
Yeah, and I want to actually point out something that you said there too, that they have this pressure to marry up, right? So women are expected to marry somebody else who is the breadwinner, and yet for much of the past few decades, it's actually been the women that have had, because they've had the opportunity to go to college, have had the opportunity to get an education. They are in a sense the breadwinners, and it is actually harder for them to find then somebody, a male person, who is doing better in life categories, quote unquote, than they are, right? When they're looking at their salaries, when they're looking at home ownership, when they're looking at other sort of tangible goods like that, tangible products. And so now there's not only the pressure of I have to find somebody and have to have children and sort of essentially give up my work life for a little bit or in some fashion or form, but I also have to magically find somebody who is already doing better than me, even though the majority of my male peers are not. And so there also has to be a shift in the society and culture of China to change those expectations as well, and to just say, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, okay? Like, just partner up with somebody that you can work with together to build a future for our country, because we fucked up, signed the government.
Which, of course, will never happen, because it's a perfect government, right? Like most other governments, they don't usually announce when they screw up on something.
Right, and there's such a large chunk of their population that is older, it'll be hard to change their mindset.
Right, because they grew up with the original regulations. And actually, Touch Me Nancy also says, to him being out of Canada, he says, same here, a lot of people from overseas come over here, especially where I live, because we have one of the biggest universities here, which is University of Western Ontario. So we see that shift over to the U.S., and as well to Canada, which is a very good point as well, because I have heard that there is a big influx of individuals also going over to Canada too. And I think it's because of that westernized thinking. They don't have so much of the pressure of the government on top of them, and they feel like they can kind of live the life that they want to. Sort of a new focus or new twist on the Western American idealism that many individuals from all over the world had when they first came here, right? Of building that right future and everything else. And I think for many of them, it's not so much getting the perfect opportunity and future, but just kind of getting away from some of the restrictions of their own government and what have you. And so there's less pressure on them because they're distancing themselves, for instance, by getting an international education and getting to a place that's not as restrictive and regulated on, which is surprising, right? Because in the U.S., we're still telling people who they should and should not marry. But in general, though, that pressure of you must marry, have a kid, I think most of it, at least in the U.S. society, is based on just general population. Like families, they'll tell each other, like, so when are you going to have kids? When are you going to get married? But it's not directly coming from the government who's, putting out propaganda going, pop kids now. You need to be the baby factory for the future. Like, there's none of that, at least, luckily. But again, who knows? A lot can change in U.S. politics, as we've learned the past 2 years.
What's baffling to me is that the government's, okay, so I see you. I see it from both sides, right? You're governing a country, and you have to juggle a lot of moving pieces, right? Because you can't have too many people because your resources won't sustain them, and then you have to look potentially outside for help, right? And you don't want to put yourself in debt, broadly speaking. But if you don't have enough people, then you cannot sustain yourself within the country, or certainly as you get older, you won't be able to, right? So you might have to look to the outside for help and get yourself into debt. So it's fascinating. In Romania, actually, they outlawed abortion and contraception for a period of time. I think it was like started in the 1970s, and I remember having conversations with my mother, because she was in her teens and 20s then, and there was a pressure that they felt, of course, because before that time abortions were sort of like the status quo. Like, if you were a woman and had sex with a man and had a baby and you didn't want it, then you could just get rid of it, right? But all of a sudden there was this pressure because the government wanted to grow the population very quickly over a short period of time. And so they were like, no, have as many children as you want, please. And there was this pressure now, of course. Well, what do you do when you do get pregnant and you don't want to be pregnant, right? And again, it's this government sort of imposing, of course, rules over how you can and cannot use your body as a woman. Because obviously it does also impact men, but in a way that is a little more indirect, right? There's no fear if you have sex with a woman as a man, that you will have to make a personal decision with your body of, do you want to keep this child or not? You do, of course, if you are told about the child, have the other decision to make as well. Have a say in the decision, hopefully, of one way or the other. But a lot of these women could do abortions in secret, could decide without involving anybody else, right? And so it was just interesting, having those conversations because, right, like, we don't live in a time or a place where yet, hopefully never, where we have to deal with some of these issues, right? But just thinking about that, like, and just having that fear of, okay, well, I'm never going to go home, I'm never going to get with anybody. And there was, of course, also that pressure, exactly, that when you got married as a woman, okay, when are you going to have kids and how many? Keep at it. And I do know that so I'm an only child, but I do know that I was the only child at my school. Everybody else had brothers and sisters, like, up the wazoo. And it had come sort of from those times where that was encouraged. You had to have more children. And it was frowned upon and looked strangely at. Like, why do you only have one kid? And, I remember just when I was talking to new people, they would assume that I had, a whole slew of brothers and sisters. And it always came, like, as a shock. And I feel like sometimes the conversations would go like, oh, well, like, what happened to them? Did they die? And it's like, no, I just never had them, So it's fascinating.
Yeah, and we get a lot of people in chat here, too, who are talking about, that, again, most of the time the woman carries the stigma, the man is just a victim of her choice. It's like, how dare you deny him of children? When again, there's two people involved in this process, right? There's others that are also saying, too, they're happy not having kids. At least in the U.S., there are plenty of kids to go around. There are plenty of children who don't have homes even right now, because there are so many kids currently in our society. Then also, there's the fact that, some people just don't want to pass on their genes. They say, hey, I face certain obstacles in my life. Again, we're becoming more and more aware, thanks to technology, of issues concerning health and everything else. That those are things that can be passed down to children, and we are becoming more aware and cognizant of how we pass down certain things to our children, right? And so I think that's also very intelligent in looking at that, because I feel like before that was never really looked at. And so most people ignored it. And of course, what happens, people had children that didn't want children, were ready for children for whatever reason, or, they needed to focus on themselves and take care of themselves first before they could feel comfortable. But because of that pressure, they had kids, too early for them. And thus, we see a lot of issues now in our culture today with, again, kids not feeling like they've grown up with parents and that they've had to raise their own siblings and many other things. And it's impacted many children's education, welfare, among many other situations. So I definitely appreciate that in chat as well. I think those are all very, very valid points. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It is your decision, and in the end, what you can do and who you are and what you go through on a daily basis. And if you don't think it's fair for a child to work with that, then, that is completely your right to say, no, I am okay right now. And luckily we have that opportunity in the US, and unfortunately it's not so much an opportunity in many other countries. So, at least for us, we can work with that. But yeah, it's definitely still very tough for those, say, in China with all the pressure, or Japan or many other places. So we can only see what actually happens. How do they regulate this or put these regulations into effect, and how will it impact the people? And unfortunately, it's always a science experiment with things like this. It's 40 years down the line. I guess we'll find out what happens next. So there's a lot of weight to this. Now, we do want to transition to the next topic, which I guess is kind of a meaty topic, if you will.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah, so you may not be aware of this, but here in the U.S., there's a state called Missouri. And Missouri has become the first state to regulate the use of the word meat. So, yes. When we say meat, what we're talking about is an actual pound of hamburger versus a meat alternative, say like Tofurky or Beyond Meat, or other businesses that have a sort of plant protein base for their food. So, again, these meat alternatives. So on Tuesday, Missouri became the first state in the country to have a law. So it's officially a law that prohibits food makers from using the word meat to refer to anything other than animal flesh. The state law forbids misrepresenting a product as meat that is not derived from harvested production livestock or poultry. Violators will be fined $1,000 and imprisoned for a year.
What?
So you will be imprisoned. So you're not only getting the fine of $1,000, which for big businesses usually ain't much, right? But being imprisoned for a year for saying you are a meat alternative, or that you are an alternative to meat because you are using the word meat to describe your food. They are saying it's a misrepresentation and you are tricking people, really, and thus you will also be imprisoned for a year. Now, when it's a big business, I don't know who they're going to go for, right? Are they going to? It's like, are they going to imprison the CEO? Are they going to try to imprison one of the investors of the company, like one of the board members? Like, what the hell? How do you actually imprison a whole company? Like, it just boggles my mind to even think of that. Let alone the whole idea that they're trying to control the word meat. That's like someone trying to copyright the word meat, because it's used in a multitude of ways, in a multitude of marketing, multitude of businesses, and people would say, no, you cannot copyright the word meat. And that's basically what Missouri is doing. It's saying, hey, we're telling you by law that we basically control the word meat, and we can tell you what it actually means. What is the definition? And it doesn't matter if you have any other words connected to it, like an alternative to meat. You're still using the word meat, so therefore fined and put in prison, which you can already imagine what I think of that. But this takes aim at manufacturers of what has been dubbed fake or non-traditional meat, as we've been saying. So clean meat, also known as lab-grown meat, is made of cultured animal tissue cells, while plant-based meat is generally from ingredients such as soy, tempeh, seitan, and many other elements. You could also do like pea protein and what have you. So basically, we're looking at like Tofurky being attacked. We're looking at like Boca burgers being attacked. We're looking at a million different alternatives. I mean, there are a ton.
Beyond Meat.
Yeah, there's a ton that are coming out of California and out of Colorado and many other states that get impacted by this. And Missouri Cattlemen's Association has cited shopper confusion in protecting local ranchers as reasons for the legislation. So right there should be a red flag. We all are very familiar with lobbyists. We're all very familiar with people in different industries trying to push the sort of endeavor of or the goals of their specific industry, right? So what it sounds like here is that, again, the Missouri Cattlemen's Association, aka lobbyists, pushed hard enough with legislators to pass this legislation because they're supposedly helping out shopper confusion, but also local ranchers, because local ranchers are getting hit by all these meat alternatives. So this is a business play right here. This is 100% political, and this has nothing to do with the actual confusion. It's the fact the meat industry is getting hit because a lot of people are looking to alternatives. Why? Well, because, of course, many meats, such as beef, those animals release a lot of methane, which actually impacts, if you believe, again, in global warming, of course, which there are many people that doubt it, but that actually impacts global warming and magnifies it. We also have the fact that there are many people who are like, I just don't need to eat meat. Again, there's also more connections to cancer, high blood pressure, many other factors because of things like red meat. And so, of course, because of this, because more people are starting to change their diets up, they're more concerned about their health, and they're looking for alternatives, it's impacted this specific association, but the meat industry as a whole. So the big but here, though, is the meat substitute market is expected to reach $7.5 billion plus globally by 2025.
Dollars.
So this is why we're saying this and why it's so important, because, again, as I mentioned, they're seeing major competition. So instead of trying to figure out new marketing techniques and new ways of, trying to get better food or to transition and have many of these people go into the meat alternative industry, well, why should we do that? That's going to cost us money, right? That's going to hit our bottom line. We're going to have to change things up that we've been doing for the past 30, 40 years. So instead of doing that, we're going to talk to mommy and daddy and say, you're not playing fair. So they go to legislators and say, well, you know what? This impacts us. So, if you're thinking that we're going to help you with your fundraising the next time you run, it might not be there. So we recommend you doing something to help us out, which is usually what happens in the U.S. and one of the big issues with politics in the U.S.
And it's just wanted to point out here, too, that they're not only going for alternatives, for companies who provide alternatives to meat, to like traditional meat, but they're also going after those companies who are creating, who are growing lab meat, from animal cells, where you're not actually, having the cows there, right? But you're genetically creating that meat. But it is still essentially the same type of meat. Essentially, it's not plant grown, it's not plant based or anything like that. It is made from the same, kind of genetic base, if you will. It's just that it's not that they, grow the animal, I guess, to... I actually don't really know a whole lot about that, so I don't want to speak too much about that particular of how they make it. But from what I understand, lab-grown meat is meant to alleviate some of the animal welfare concerns that people who do eat traditional meat are concerned about.
Yeah, well, and what's funny about that too, again, is the fact that we have lab-based meat, we have, GMO and all this other stuff going around where everything's based in a lab, whether for good or for bad, depending on what you believe and the facts you've taken from proper research. But overall, it's like, well, how does Missouri actually truly get away with saying, well, this is what meat is? Because then you have to say, well, this isn't meat, but it's a meat alternative, and it was done in a lab or, through science, let's say. Because, again, when you say through a lab, it has such a negative connotation, but through science. But yet you're still doing that with meat, too. So technically speaking, it's not like it's natural meat in that sense of it's not like you took it off the cow or off the sheep or anything like that. So it's, I feel like in a way their terms for meat are kind of loose though too, because they're still allowing this lab-based meat just fine. Like they're not punishing these individuals, but it's in a way similar science. And so that's intriguing as well. And it'll be intriguing to see how this conversation unfolds in Missouri and in the U.S. too, and see if other states tried jumping on this. And on Monday, too, the company that makes Tofurky actually filed an injunction in a Missouri federal court to prevent enforcement of the statute, alleging the state has received no complaints about consumers befuddled by the term plant-based meats, and that preventing manufacturers from using the word is a violation of their First Amendment rights. Plus, it pointed out meat also refers to the edible part of nuts and fruits. So it's, again, Missouri cannot take control of a word, especially when there's multiple connotations to it. Because what they can say is, well, for instance, jackfruit. Jackfruit can be considered sort of a plant-based meat alternative, and it is a fruit. So you say it's the meat of the fruit. Right. And thus you can't then imprison someone from that company and charge them $1,000 because they did that.
Right. Well, and I feel like Missouri's also, in a way, saying that people can't read in their state. Because I have never been confused between a meat and a meat alternative. Like, they pretty much tell you on the packaging when this is not, like, traditional meat. And, Mario Man brings up a good point in our chat as well that, I mean, there is a broader issue here too, but I think even separate from this particular one of, labeling and how companies label things, right? Like label their food products, because sometimes it is misleading, right? Mm-hmm. They'll put something in bold letters on the top, on the front with a tiny little star, and then maybe the star on the back is like, no, we just kidding. or they, as they say in the court of law, right? Like you gotta tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But maybe they don't tell the whole truth, right? Maybe they put part of it on their labeling. So that, the whole labeling of food products, of all products really in general, right? Like I feel like, we look at a printed thing and we take it for granted that the company is telling us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth on it, which might not always be the case, which I definitely agree on. That's a really good point. But in this particular issue, the Cattlemen's Association is going after their competitors, and instead of, addressing maybe some of the concerns in whatever way they can of the consumers who are not buying their products, they're just attacking their competitors and trying to eliminate choice. That's the way that I see it. At least.
Well, and who the hell is actually going, wait a minute, Tofurky tricked me. I'm going to call the Missouri Cattlemen's Association. Who the fuck is actually doing that?
Nobody.
Not a goddamn person. They're going to contact Tofurky and be like, I feel like I was lied to. Which Tofurky, again, has said they've gotten zero, nada complaints concerning that, because people are intelligent enough to understand meat alternative, and that is in the meat alternative section. I mean, this is the other thing, is that if you're going to go after, the creators of this faux meat, this fake meat, this meat alternative, then you probably should look at how it's being sold also at grocery stores, right? Wouldn't you go after the grocery stores too? Because they control their own marketing. They can control where the placement of the meat alternatives is in comparison to the actual beef, chicken, and fish. And so, if for whatever reason the grocery store is mixing them, then yeah, I would say, well, don't go after Tofurky. Go after the grocery store that's fucking it all up. But from what I've seen at every single grocery store I've ever gone to, they've always had a complete separate section. And a lot of times the meat alternative section is actually in the produce section because you're dealing with plants, you're dealing with vegetables, you're dealing with fruit. So it makes more sense to put it there. And it's completely separate from the beef, the chicken, and the fish, what have you. So it's just hilarious to me that there is some sort of, that this is their argument, is that, well, people are confused. Well, then maybe you should look at the education level and the rating level in Missouri. I don't know what to tell you, because supposedly no one's having an issue with it. The only people having an issue with it would be you, the Cattlemen's Association, because no one, again, is calling you up and going, yeah, these Tofurky people, they're making you look bad because they're saying they have meat and it's not real meat. How dare they put beans in this? What is a bean? It's just amazing to me that this is the argument. And it's such a childish argument in a way, and also such an old argument. Oh, well, you're it's impacting the consumers. Really, how? Well, because, they're getting confused.
Because they stopped buying our product. So they must be confused. It has nothing to do with our product and our ways of making our product, and maybe people are displeased about that. It's because they're confused.
Yeah, it's mind-numbing.
I'm calling out the Cattlemen's Association. If they want to email me, please. I would love to have a conversation with y'all.
Yeah, please jump on our show. We'd love to have you here. But also, too, a quote here. I have always envisioned Tofurky serving a greater purpose beyond the plate, acting as an engine for global change, said Tofurky CEO Jamie Athos in a statement about the suit. To help reduce global dependence on animal agriculture, therefore improving environmental sustainability, which we've discussed, animal welfare, which we've mentioned, and human health, which we've also discussed. Also, Ernest Baskin, an assistant professor of food marketing at St. Joseph's University, said consumers use the word meat when applied to non-animal protein as a shortcut to understand how they eat the food they see on supermarket shelves. So what he's saying here is that people aren't confused. They're just utilizing it to better explain how to incorporate it into their daily meals.
Right. Don't put this stuff in your ice cream. Put it on a plate with some potatoes and broccoli.
Yeah, I mean, you could put it in your ice cream, but we're not going to say you're going to enjoy it.
Right.
I'm just throwing that out there. Then again, I guess it depends on the ice cream, right? I mean, there's red bean ice cream and stuff like that. So maybe a little red bean with some Beyond Burger hamburger. I mean, that'd be still weird. What am I saying?
I will say the Beyond Meat Burger is the most amazing thing on the planet. I'm just gonna put that out there. Beyond Meat, if you want an ambassador for your brand, hit me up. They've actually made me enjoy beef, quote unquote, the taste of, because their plant-based burgers are the most amazing thing I have ever tasted in my life.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to meat.
And our chat, too, is getting in on this and saying, Rainbow Smash says, Tofurky's actually good. I'm just saying which it is. I've had it before as well. They are very good. Don't forget the bacon section. That's the most important one, of course. We don't want to leave out bacon in this debate when it comes to food sections in a grocery store.
And I will say alternative bacon is also pretty good.
It is. That's true. There is also alternative bacon out there.
Very delicious.
And Rainbow Smash, of course, also says, too, try it in soup before anything else. It's the best way to try it to see if you like that meat alternative, which is actually a very good point too. Some people mention tofu ice cream, but the thing is, there is actually tofu ice cream.
There is.
There's soy-based ice cream. There's also coconut milk ice cream and almond milk ice cream. So my next statement I would want to say here then is, well, if Missouri is going to go after people who use the word meat, what about the people who use the word cream?
Or milk.
Or milk. Like, so for instance, ice cream. Ice cream, typically dairy, a heavy cream of some sort, usually deriving from a cow, right? Well, now we have these alternatives, which we just listed off. So is Missouri also going to walk the walk, talk the talk that they've been doing with the meat industry, but now for the dairy industry? Are they going to go after the alternatives for ice cream and what have you? Like, that's the thing, is like, if you're gonna be doing something like this, don't be hypocritical for everything. Then try to piss everyone off and see what happens. So, you know, you've got to look at it from both sides. And if they're not attacking everything, it's very, very clear that it's only because of the Cattlemen's Association, of course, and because of funding for future runs in office. Veruca Cat says, judging by, and this is a quote, judging by land use, the U.S. is dominated by cattle. More than 1/3 of the area of the contiguous states is given up to pasture, more than any other land use type. Most of it is for cows, with much smaller areas nibbled by horses, sheep, goats, and other. Which is also a great point, too, that a lot of the U.S. land is covered with cattle. You know, it's made for cattle to run, so that way you can keep supplying the meat industry. So the meat industry is getting a huge hit because not only are they not selling meat, but they have all this overhead cost. All this land they have to deal with, the whole process, the employees, and everything else. So this is desperation talking right now. You know, this is them honestly really trying to jump at it and go, well, you know, we can barely afford things as is. We can't change. You know, we don't want to change. Oh, heaven forbid change. And so they're just trying to attack where they can. So it's clear about the desperation. You can easily see it, right? Because if you had that much land in the U.S. dedicated to that, and now you're not seeing it, and the government too, because they're a part of this, right? They're allowing for this amount of land to be designated off for the cattle industry. So that does in a way impact the government too. So it makes sense, unfortunately, unfairly even, that they would even try to pass this.
I just want to give a call to the Cattlemen Association and be like, listen, every time I go to the doctor, you know what they tell me? You should eat less meat. And I'm like, I don't even eat meat. But the fact that even doctors are like, you should eat less meat. And now these, you know, this whole thing is happening. It's kind of like, well, my doctor told me to eat less meat, but now I don't have any choices to substitute that protein void in my life with. Damn it, Missouri.
Well, and a great quote, too, by the way, from Ernest Baskin as it continues. He says, you know, there's a segment of consumers that doesn't have to eat alternative products, but wants to. In those cases, putting those options together in front of consumers gives them the thought that, hey, maybe these two are similar. Maybe I can substitute. So right there, too, he's saying, you know, it's not like we're like these people feel forced to, you know, eat these alternatives. Is that they want to, and so these companies are trying to supply the demand rather than them just pushing it out and then trying to brainwash people into thinking that no, this is actually meat.
Right. It's like when you look at a menu and there's a grilled portobello mushroom burger on there.
It's not really a burger. Oh
no,
Missouri, go after the restaurants.
Cheesecake Factory, watch out.
Missouri government's coming for you, son.
It's like some people like to eat that. Like, I would eat it. Evan wouldn't.
That's because I don't like mushrooms, but, you know.
Right, but you're not being, like, forced.
Right, exactly. No one's forcing a portobello down my throat.
Just because it's on a menu.
Yeah, exactly right. And so it's like, it's just an option. And it's an option that's past FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So the FDA has said, yeah, this stuff is okay. It's not dangerous. It's consumable. It all makes sense. It passes us. Now, mind you, our FDA isn't the best because we still have a lot of sketchy shit in our food.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, we do.
But overall, though, they've said, okay, this is okay. This is fine. So really, like, the state of Missouri doesn't have anything to really stand on besides this really lame-ass argument of it confuses people. People are dumb here. Which is basically, again, as you pointed out, what the government is saying. People are dumb here. They can't figure out shit.
Right, which is, like, not true.
No. I've known a lot of people from the South, a lot of people from Missouri, a lot of people from all over. Folks are not dumb. They can frickin' read. They can frickin' figure this shit out. Like, it's amazing the fact that the government is like, well, our people are stupid. And there's not people rising up going, what the fuck do you mean I'm stupid? Who the hell are you to tell me what like what to think? And like, I can't understand this and process it. This is not meat. I get that. But I choose whether I want to eat it or not.
Right. I mean, who knows too what some of these companies are doing anyways, right? Like whether they are packaging real meat, fake meat, whatever other product. At the end of the day, right, we, in some ways, and I do this, I sort of blindly trust what they put on the label. Just because I had access to a printer who mass-produced these labels. It's like, when you walk into town and you're looking for a new place to get a haircut, and they're like, this is the #1 haircut place as voted last year. And I'm like, who the fuck voted? I was here last year. I didn't get no vote sheet to mark it on. It's like they just printed it, and it's like, does that make it really true? But yes, that is the discussion for another time. I will say I'm excited that, and I don't know if it's a recent thing in Target or if it's a West Coast thing, because I only noticed it in the past year that since we moved here. But Target now actually has a whole section that says plant-based protein in their frozen section. Which is awesome, because at least for somebody who is looking for that, great. Here I go. I'm actually going to purchase this from you, store. How are you?
Well, yeah, and I think people will not get confused without the word meat in it either. So, I mean, if the industry is in Missouri, if they can't get rid of this bullshit law, then at least they can go to that and say, okay, then it's plant-based protein. And guess what? Like, we have this addiction, especially in the U.S., for protein. We need to have it in bars and in, shakes and what have you. Mind you, there are plenty of people that don't get enough protein, so it's actually good in a sense. We just have to be careful, like with anything else. There's too much of a good thing. But people will still buy it because they'll see protein. Protein is trending in the U.S. and things with protein, and they'll be intrigued because, plant-based. Because usually you see things like whey protein, which is from animal, and many other proteins also from animals. So, egg for example, exactly protein. Right. And there are more and more people changing up their diets, trying to figure out, ways of living longer, not having as many issues as maybe they have faced in the past. And so, they're intrigued by things like this. So, at least there's a little bit of a loophole with utilizing that terminology for right now until they get things squared away.
I also, if you look at it really long term, right? Like, we all want, well, maybe not all. Okay, there's some subset of people in the world that would love to travel off-world, right? Whether to a completely different planet, whether spaceships, starships, all that good stuff. Can you imagine that you obviously have to have some sort of a food source that is sustainable long term?
Mm-hmm.
Bringing a bunch of animals with you means that the ship has to be bigger, right? You're expending more fuel. You have to have more space. You have to have conditions wherein these animals understand that they're going to go through high G to get up there.
That they can even survive in the first place.
Right. And so, having lab-grown meat or meat alternatives like protein in some form or fashion that is, seed-based. Seeds don't take up a whole lot of room. And you can really control that environment and grow those when and as you need it. I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense from just that perspective of like, we need to have alternatives to the sources of protein that we've had for generations if we want to create or, progress in some of these areas that we do want to progress in. And obviously that's thinking very long term, and the Cattlemen's Association and a lot of companies have shareholders who are thinking short term. What are my investments looking like? So I completely understand where they're coming from. They're afraid. It's a little bit of an act of desperation. But if you look at it long term too, it just makes sense to have choices.
Exactly. And, diets change constantly. And, heaven forbid something impacts the ecosystem where we can't be reliant on these animals anymore. We're going to have to go to plant-based. And, at least those things can survive in very specific indoor conditions. And, that's something that can be very long term. And you can grow, plants from itself, right? You cut up a potato, you can grow more potatoes, among other things. You cannot do that with a cow. And I suggest not trying it. Let me cut up Betsy here. Let me throw her on the ground. We'll have 5 cows. It's not how that shit works. And
it'd be cool if it did, but
it'd be fucking weird. It'd creep me out, actually. But overall, we've got to think about these things. And again, but as you said, it's long term. Many people, businesses do not want to think long term because they've got investors, they've got people that want money now, and they're CEOs. I want that raise. I don't care if you have to fire 500 people beneath me. I want that raise. So there are a lot of pressures, a lot of moving parts. So. Only time will tell. Again, you can tell what side we're on for this. I mean, we wish the best to these alternative meat companies. I use the word meat. Fuck you. And these plant-based proteins.
You can't listen to this in Missouri.
Oh, no. That's true. Cover your ears, children. Cover your ears. But yeah, so that's where we're at with this. And we'll see again in the next couple weeks. I'm sure there's going to be some pretty big announcements about what happens next for this. So again, as we said, don't just take this for face value. Keep up to date with it. Do some research into it and really keep track of what's going on, because this could impact your state next.
Right on. Well, now I want to go eat some meat. I'm looking at you, Beyond Burger. I'm coming for you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on episode 34 of MindMineTV. If you're listening to us on Podbean, iTunes, or you're watching this on YouTube, join us for our live conversations live on Twitch, twitch.tv/MindMineTV, every Thursday at 4 p.m. PDT and Saturday at 2 p.m. PDT. We would love to talk with you and get you pumped up. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a good one.